Hey folks, welcome back. In the last video, you seen that I got the Pettibone hybrid axles all done up, ready to go in the truck. So now that's what I'm going to do in this video. I've got Midnight Panic here in the shop, and what I'm going to do is remove the Axletechs and get these new axles installed. Now there's not a lot of technical stuff involved in removing the axles. It's all just nuts and bolts. So I'm going to set you up in the corner, put the camera on time lapse, and get to work on this thing. Well, the front axle is completely out of the truck. The rear axle is ready to come out. I've got all the shock bolts out, sway bars hung up, drive lines out. Everything's unhooked. All I have to do is pull the 4-link bolts. And this one is also ready to come out. It's always a little bit discouraging to take something like this apart. I mean, I built this truck exactly how I wanted it. And now we're making a change, and I haven't even had this thing together that long. It kind of reminds me of the buggy. Back in 2014, I removed the Rockwell F106s from that rig and put in a set of Axletechs. And at the time, I really wondered if I was making the right decision. But quite honestly, that is one of the best modifications I ever made to that rig. So hopefully, I'm making the right decision here. I really think so. I'm looking forward to getting this thing on the big tires, the big axles, and going beat on it. It's a lot better than sitting in the garage not doing nothing. So now what I'm going to do is try and maneuver this front axle, set it on some dollies over there, try and roll it in here and get it positioned under the front of the rig. I'm running out of daylight outside, which means the skeeters are coming. So I'm going to try and get that done so I can close up that front door. Then I'll worry about getting this rear axle, probably use the dollies to slide it out the side so I can get the rear axle, the new rear axle, installed. So back to time lapse for you guys and back to work for me. As the time lapse shows, everything went pretty smooth, getting the Axletechs out of the truck and then getting these new differentials installed there. They're heavy, they're kind of tough to work with by yourself, but got them done. Everything went in there really uneventfully. It all went pretty smooth. I've not adjusted any of the 4-link stuff on the front yet. And I've got, a little bit of caster that I was shooting for, a little bit of pinion angle. And the rear, I've actually adjusted the link bars out about 2 turns. And I'm not too sure that that's not gonna end up going back where they originally were. Right now, I've pulled all the cribbing out from under the truck. I've got the hoist holding up the back of the chassis, and then the jack is holding up the front of the truck. So I'm able to, cycle the suspension from full compression to full droop, look for any interference or any issues, which actually right now everything looks really good. Really happy with how it's, pretty much they just bolted right back in there. The next step, I would really like to do drive lines next, but to do the drive lines, I need to get the flanges on there. Like this one here has a flange on it. As you can see on the front, I've got a yoke on there. I do have a flange for the front, but before I do flanges, I need to get brakes on here. So it'd be handy to be able to bolt the caliper on. That caliper is actually just kind of gripping onto that rotor, hanging on all by itself. But it would be easier to bolt caliper mounts on, then the flanges with the rotors, and then the calipers. But before I can do that, I actually have to build the caliper mounts. So that really actually is the next step. Get caliper mounts built so I can get the rotors and the flanges on both rear and front axles. Then I can continue cycling the suspension from full droop to full compression, figure out my driveline lengths, and see if I have everything there to put drivelines together. Then after that, I can worry about plumbing, which will be plumb the brakes and the steering on both ends. And it will basically be back to where it was when I drove it around here yesterday and started pulling everything apart. Before I go get started on building caliper mounts, I wanted to take a minute and talk a little bit about the fasteners that I have holding the suspension under this truck. Now, one of my main concerns that I had when I decided to go from a mega truck to a full-blown monster truck was the size of the fastener that I have holding the link bars in here. Originally, when I started gathering parts up to build a mega truck, I had gathered up a set of medium-size EMF heim joints with 1¼ shanks. And that was where I started building the chassis, all of the, the link mounts on the chassis itself, the tabs on the differentials, all of that stuff was built around those heim joints. Well, partially through the build, I just decided I wanted to go with the 1½ shank in a large body from EMF. Now the 1¼ medium body heim is every bit or more tough than any off-the-shelf 1¼ heim you're gonna buy, flat out. But I just had the opportunity to pick up a set of 1½ large body joints, and that just kind of made me feel a little bit better. So I ordered a set of those, and when I ordered them with a 3/4 inch through bolt, because all of the tabs, everything I'd already built was already with a 3/4 inch through hole. So now here we are, we're moving up from a mega truck, which never really ran, to a full-blown monster truck. And everything everything about these differentials is bigger and beefier. I've made the tabs, the link mounts, everything on the axles out of 1/2 inch plate versus 3/8. It's just quite a bit beefier. The only thing I'm really not beefing up, I don't need to beef the joints up anymore. These 1½ joints are going to do anything that I will ever do. But I am a little bit concerned about that 3/4 inch fastener. Up to this point, I had, grade 8 3/4 inch bolts in here. Good, strong fastener, but I decided to go ahead and order some L9 hardware from McMaster Carr. And just to give you an idea of the difference between this bolt and a grade 8 bolt, according to my cat book, the torque spec on a regular grade 8 3/8 bolt is about 275 foot-pounds. This here, from what I can find on Google, an L9 3/4 inch coarse thread bolt you can torque pretty much anywhere from about 375 foot-pounds to about 425 foot-pounds, depending on if you're torquing with lubrication or dry, if the bolt's coated. You know, there's different torque specs for, you know, different scenarios. So far, I've torqued them to 400 foot-pounds, and we're gonna start with that. Now, as far as the application for a bolt, I probably have a little bit of unpopular opinion. There's a lot of people that will take their bolt, they will buy a really long bolt, and try to get as much of the shoulder through your components as possible. So you've got a link tab here, your joint, and another link tab, and they will try and get a bolt that they can slide through the two tabs and the joint and have barely enough thread to tighten that nut down on there. And they're relying on the shoulder of that bolt, like the size, the diameter of the bolt, the fitment in the hole to keep any movement from going on there. My opinion is that is not how your fastener should work on a heim joint or a link bar. You do not want to rely on your fastener in shear. If you were going to rely on a shear, just use a pin. You could have a very snug fit pin that allows no movement. What you want to have is this bolt in tension. You want to be able, you're squeezing those three components together is what's really giving it its strength. If you are torquing your bolt, whether it be a 3/4 inch bolt or a 5/8 bolt, those are two really popular bolt diameters in a suspension application. If you are torquing those bolts to their suggested torque values and you are still getting movement in that joint, say like your drag car, you're going out there and running 20 passes and you're starting to see movement in that, you don't have a big enough fastener. You're not getting enough tension, you're not squeezing those components together enough. This is my opinion. If I put these bolts in and I see movement in this stuff, if there's not a good reason, I mean, if you put stuff together dirty, or I fully expect to be able to retorque these bolts in a short amount of time as they work the paint out from between the link tabs and the ball in the joint itself. I can see torquing these bolts fairly soon, and then they shouldn't move after that. If I do get movement, if I'm continually having to tighten these bolts up, I think that I will need to move on to a bigger fastener at that point. At that point, I will, take on the challenge of re-drilling all of these holes in all of these tabs. We'll move on to a 1-inch bolt with a 1-inch ball, 1-inch through hole in the joints at that point. But for now, I'm gonna try the 3/4 inch L9 bolts torqued to 400 foot-pounds and see how that works for us. Caliper mounts worked out really nice. Everything bolted right up, no issues there. So I was able to get the flanges, the rotors, and the calipers all bolted up here, both front and rear. And then I figured out the length on the rear drive shaft. And fortunately, I'm able to just basically remove the 8.5C yoke that fits the Axletech and install one that will work with that flange. So this is what I was using on the Axletech, and like I said, this is an 8.5C U-joint. I'm able to cut this tube off just far enough back to make sure that I get the basically the register of this yoke out of the tube. I've already done that. This is the rear drive shaft right here, and I've got this 1550 series yoke already pressed in, a little bit of heat, and got it fit in there nice and snug, everything's straight and true. And I've got my welder and the roller set up just like I built those tubes up for the axle housings. I'm gonna go hook up my remote pedal, get my hood on, and get this one burned in. Probably call it a night after that. Tomorrow I'll get the front drive line done and go from there.
The next day.
Better give it a minute. That mark right there is lined up with the U-joint on the slip yoke. So now I have to have it in phase, so I have to have this in line with the one on the other end. That's why I reference that mark. Let that cool off, it'll shrink onto that part, and then we can set it up in the rollers and weld it up. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have you hold this drive line up in there and I'll put the bolts in. How's that?
Okay.
You got it? Here, take that.
I got it.
You got it?
Yes. Which way do you want?
I'm just kidding, I'll take it.
I can hold it, but not when I crawl under there.
Probably have you, let me get under here ready.
Okay.
And then I'll have you probably hold that end up. Might not need it, actually. I might just have you hand me bolts when I get to that point.
These bolts on the floor?
Yeah. You want to go grab that impact wrench?
Or is
The
it?
white one, I think it's on the table, and make sure it's got a 12-point half-inch socket. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if I can get all the bolts started first and then go from there. Click. I say we put the big tires. No, it's air up shocks, then we'll put the big tires on it.
Yeah.
Yeah? All right. I don't know, what do you think? You ready to do some tires or what?
Yeah.
Yeah. Me too.
Tires. That means how are we gonna get in here? Easier than it looks.
Here, a nice, slick, smooth surface.
On dirt, it's not easy.
Clearly, we got the big tires put on the truck, and I don't know about you guys, but I think this thing looks really good. The proportions of the tires and the wheelbase and the size of the axles and everything just really come together on this project. Unfortunately, everything is kind of so big, I can't really even get far enough away from it in the shop to really see it. And no, it will not drive out of the shop with these tires on it. That's a 12-foot wide door, and I'd say the truck is closer to 13 or 14 feet wide. Completely worth it to go ahead and tire it up here in the building. We got the tires on my last day off, so I figured it can just sit in here over the week with the tires on it. Again, I've been down here a couple hours a night after work, working on other parts, trying to get stuff done. I have 2 more days at work, so I have tonight and 2 more evenings that I can work on parts. Then I have 1 more set of days off. And about 3 weeks ago, I was slating this set of days off to work on the trailer because it also needs some stuff done before we can go to the first show with the truck. So I'm trying to bust some stuff out this week and still at least get a couple of days to work on the trailer. That might be a whole nother video, whole nother project. Right now, what I'm working on is wheel tethers. So I'd mentioned on the wheel tethers in the last video where they bolt onto the kingpins. That's why I have these washers stacked up here. These are actually 1/2 inch longer bolts. So my wheel tethers, the upper and lower plates will bolt to these 2 bolt holes. They'll extend out, go over, and there will be 4 1/2 inch bolt holes in a plate that sticks up and is gusseted back. Those 4 bolt holes will have half rings that go around each half of the wheel hub. and then it will have these same parts on the bottom that those half rings will, you know, come down around to the bottom and attach to. So those plates, I went down to Dad's place on the plasma cam and cut out all these plates Saturday night after work. And then last night, I came up here and got all the swarf cleaned off of them and got them cleaned up. While I was at it, I went ahead and welded 4 of them out. So I've got 2 over there on the floor. Then I've got these 2 here on the bench, just so I can show you what they look like. They actually go on the kingpins, the kingpin caps, just like this. Those 2 longer 7/8 bolts go through here. This is the part that extends out over that ring on the wheel hub. And then these are the 2 halves, the actual tethers. And they will bolt on just like that. And you'll have 2 of them to go completely around the hub and the ring on the hub, the tether ring. So that's where I'm at tonight. I'm going to get these finished out, get them all welded up, and then probably move on to plumbing. Try and get on the brake lines and the steering. See what I can get done tonight. Keep this project moving. Last night I got the rest of the wheel tether mounts all welded up, and then I drug in my roll of hydraulic hose and a handful of fittings. I started off with the rear steer, so I've got that all replumbed right here from the link bar down to the cylinders. I've run the pump a little bit, just working the air out of it. Tonight's project is to work on the front cylinder, which is kind of the same thing except for I've got a block up here. I'll get the door opened up so I can get around front. I'll show you what we've got going on there and then move on to building some hoses. Here we are at the front of the truck, and this is tonight's plumbing project. So here's the bypass valve that I was talking about. What I have to do is plumb from each one of those hard lines to each one of these fittings right here. From there, I will have to go from each one of these fittings to each cylinder. Now, the purpose of this block is actually kind of a safety item. If something were to happen, say you hit something really hard with that front tire, or actually it would be this front tire, would transfer through the tie rod. Essentially what's going to happen is this cylinder is going to compress. And when it does that, under force like that, you're going to get transfer of fluid through this hose relatively violently. And if it comes up through here and this block isn't here, that fluid's going to keep right on going up the hard lines, up to the point that it gets to the HMU or your orbital valve, which is what your steering wheel is hooked to. So as that fluid rushes up there violently, it's going to try and rip that steering wheel out of your hands. What this block does is as that fluid comes up through that hose under pressure violently, when it hits these adjustable reliefs, it will just bypass into the other hose and go to the other cylinder. So as this one is compressing, bypasses through the block, the hose, the block, into the other cylinder, which is extending and has room for that fluid to go. Now the goal is to set these reliefs so that under normal steering conditions, it doesn't affect your steering. If you're steering and it's getting spongy, it's trying to bypass through here and go to return, then it is actually set too light. So you have to set these up so you're getting your steering pressure, but anything that is abnormal or violent is going to bypass into the other cylinder. So that's what I'm going to work on tonight. Hopefully I can get the front steering all done up. Probably won't bleed it today, but the next time I fire it up, I can cycle some fluid through it and get everything all bled out. The front steering's pretty well wrapped up. As you can see, we've got these two lines here coming from the hard lines on down to the bypass block, and then from there to each cylinder. I also got the brakes all plumbed in, which we actually utilized a lot of the plumbing from the air lockers on the Axletechs. These differentials don't have lockers. I don't need air going to them. So I used the hard lines and some of the flex line to actually plumb in the pinion brakes. Then earlier today, Allison and I went through and bled the brakes, got everything working there, feel pretty good. Really, the only thing I've got left is to button up the driveline cages. As you can see, I got my Bluetooth driveline in here right now. I need to get driveline cages built and then go through and top off all the fluids, you know, fill these differentials, planetaries, check the transfer case, and then basically just a generic bolt check and get ready for this first show. Earlier today, I also tightened up all of these bolts that were left loose. You know, when I got these axles put in the truck, I hadn't installed all of the knuckle bolts yet. That's all done. I just need to get these driveline cages going. I finally got this axle swap all wrapped up. Basically just to finish off the install, we had to finish these tethers. Got those painted, bolted in place. You can see how that ring that is attached to the kingpin bolts is on the outside of that ring welded to the hub. So you get an idea of how that system works. Here on the pinion side of the axle, you can see we've got some driveline cages built. We've got these hoops that are going around the U-joint in there, hugging the brake rotor and the caliper, and then you've got the cage goes up the driveline up here to the transfer case. As per MTRA rules, each one of those rings is within 12 inches of each other. That's the front axle, and we basically just duplicated and did the same thing for the rear axle. So all the safety stuff is in place. I did have to change the configuration on my rear steer return to center cable a little bit. That's all working good. She's pretty much ready to rock. As you can see, the truck is pulled into the shop forward. I turned it around, pulled it out of the shop, turned it around in the yard, and then pulled it back in the shop because I'm actually getting ready to load the thing up. Got the Peterbilt backed up to this door. Just finished building that rack for a pair of tires. And I'm getting ready to pull this truck around to that door right there and try and load this thing backwards, because there's really no other way to test it than go to a show. Day after tomorrow, we're leaving here, headed to Santa Rosa for a 3-day show. We're gonna put this thing through its paces and hopefully it survives the test. So the next video will be a show, actually footage of this thing running as a monster truck. So until then, thanks for watching. Have a good one. You doing all the labor?